A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Blood Moon Rising. The blood moon hung over the Colorado Rockies, like an open wound in the night sky, bathing everything in crimson hues that transformed Victoria Stone's familiar veterinary clinic into an otherworldly landscape. The wind howled through the snow-capped peaks, carrying with it the metallic scent of the approaching storm. And something else. Something wild that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. Victoria adjusted the surgical lamp over the operating table, where she had just finished suturing the wounds of a German shepherd that had fought with a black bear. Her hands, steady after 5 years of practice in this remote region of Colorado, trembled slightly as she cleaned the instruments. Not from the exhaustion of 18 hours of continuous work, but from an inexplicable sensation that something was about to change forever. The 28-year-old veterinarian had built a reputation in these mountains as someone who could handle any emergency. Ranchers drove for hours to reach her clinic, knowing that her skilled hands and unwavering determination had saved countless animals that others would have given up on. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green scrubs were stained with the evidence of another long day, fighting to preserve life in this unforgiving wilderness. Thunder roared over the mountains like the lament of some primordial beast. Victoria wondered, not for the first time that night, if she should have accepted the job in Denver that had been offered to her last month. The salary would have been 3 times what she earned here, complete with modern equipment and a team of specialists. But something had kept her here, in this town forgotten by time, where ancestral legends about creatures of the night were still whispered around campfires. The locals spoke in hushed tones about things that roamed the forests during certain lunar cycles. Old-timers claimed their grandfathers had seen shapes moving between the trees that were neither fully human nor completely animal. Victoria had always dismissed these stories as mountain folklore, remnants of Native American legends mixed with the isolation-induced paranoia of people who spent too much time alone in the wilderness. The crash of shattering glass made her spin around abruptly. The clinic's front door had been destroyed, and among the glittering fragments appeared the most imposing silhouette she had ever seen. A wolf, but not like those that occasionally came down from the mountains in winter. This animal was enormous, easily the size of a small horse, with black fur that seemed to absorb the red moonlight. Its golden eyes found her across the room with an intelligence that made her breath catch in her throat. The beast staggered, and it was then that Victoria saw the dark, abundant blood. It dripped from multiple wounds on its left flank, creating a pool that slowly spread across the white linoleum floor. Her medical training activated automatically, overcoming the primitive fear that screamed at her to run. This was what she had dedicated her life to, saving creatures in pain, regardless of species or circumstance. "Dear God," she murmured, approaching slowly with her hands extended in a gesture of peace. "What happened to you?" The wolf watched her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and for a disconcerting moment, Victoria could have sworn there was understanding in that golden gaze, recognition, even gratitude. The wounds were deep, clearly caused by bullets that had pierced muscle and grazed bone, but there was something strange about the injuries, cauterized edges that suggested the bullets had been made of an unusual metal. Silver, perhaps, though that made no medical sense. "Easy," she whispered, preparing a sedative syringe with practiced efficiency. "I'm just going to help you." To her amazement, the wolf didn't resist when she applied the injection. It simply lay down on the cold floor, keeping those golden eyes fixed on her face, as if memorizing every detail. The work was meticulous and demanding. Cleaning the wounds required careful precision to avoid damaging healthy tissue. Extracting metallic fragments that gleamed strangely under the surgical light took nearly an hour. Each piece seemed to burn her gloves, leaving small holes in the latex that she couldn't quite explain. Throughout the procedure, Victoria found herself talking to the animal, a habit she had developed with nervous patience over the years. "You know, you should be unconscious from the amount of sedative I gave you, but here you are, awake and alert as if you were—" She stopped, shaking her head as if dismissing an impossible thought. A strange sound emerged from the wolf's throat, something between a whimper and what sounded disturbingly like muffled laughter. The suturing process revealed the true extent of the damage. Multiple bullet wounds, suggested this wasn't a hunting accident but a deliberate attack. Someone had been trying to kill this magnificent creature with systematic precision. Victoria's anger flared as she worked, her protective instincts extending beyond domestic animals to this wild, mysterious being that had sought refuge in her clinic. The roar of engines outside the clinic made her freeze mid-stitch. Bright headlights pierced through the windows, followed by the sound of vehicle doors slamming and heavy boots approaching with military precision. Victoria looked at the wolf, which had raised its head with ears erect and lips pulled back, revealing fangs that seemed capable of piercing bone. A low growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that made the clinic's windows vibrate. "Dr. Stone," the rough voice came from outside, accompanied by aggressive knocking on the destroyed doorframe. "We know you're in there. We're looking for a dangerous animal that may have sought refuge here." Victoria looked into the wolf's golden eyes and made a decision that would change her life forever. Without fully understanding why, she felt this animal needed protection, not capture. There was something about its gaze that spoke of intelligence and pain that went beyond mere animal instinct. "One moment," she shouted, helping the wolf to stand and quickly guiding it toward the back recovery room. Despite its size and injuries, the creature moved with surprising grace. "Stay here and keep quiet," she whispered, surprising herself by speaking to it as if it could understand every word. The men who entered were clearly hunters, but not the type who sought deer or wild boar. They carried military-looking rifles with specialized modifications and had the coordinated discipline of soldiers. Their gear suggested they were equipped for hunting something far more dangerous than ordinary wildlife. The leader, a middle-aged man with scars that suggested a life of violence, scanned the clinic with calculating eyes. "Doctor, we've been tracking a rabid wolf through the mountains. Very dangerous. Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" Victoria maintained her neutral expression, though her heart beat like a drum. "I've been operating all night. I haven't seen any wolves." The hunters searched the clinic methodically for 20 tense minutes, overturning equipment and examining every corner with professional thoroughness. But the wolf remained completely silent in the back room, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Finally, apparently satisfied that there was nothing to find, they left with warnings about keeping the doors well locked and reporting any unusual animal sightings immediately. When Victoria returned to the recovery room, the wolf had disappeared. The back window was open, and in the mud outside the clinic, clearly visible under the waning moon, were tracks that began as wolf paws and gradually transformed into bare human footprints. Victoria stood there, staring at the impossible tracks, while the reality she knew silently crumbled around her. Chapter 2. Awakening Call. Dawn broke hesitantly through the mountains, filtering through the fogged windows of the veterinary clinic that Victoria Stone had made her refuge and sanctuary. Her body ached with deep exhaustion, but what kept her awake wasn't fatigue. It was a strange sensation, a constant humming in her senses that bewildered her. She tried to stand, but the room spun around her. Closing her eyes, she breathed deeply, attempting to anchor her consciousness, while her mind grappled with the inexplicable. When she opened them again, a different brightness reflected from the window. The blood moon still clung to the sky longer than natural, sustained by some ancestral force that defied astronomical laws, tinting the horizon with pale red before fading with the dawn that promised a new day. But for Victoria, nothing would ever be the same again. The clinic, which moments before had seemed like the only safe place in the world, had transformed into a portal toward an uncertain destiny. Her hands trembled as she tried to grasp a cup of cold coffee she had left on the worn oak table. The bitter liquid tasted different, more intense, as if each molecule carried information her tongue could decipher. Every sound seemed amplified beyond comprehension. The distant chirping of birds felt like a symphony playing directly in her ears, each note distinct and meaningful. She could hear the scurrying of small rodents in the walls, the creaking of wooden beams settling in the morning temperature change, even the whispered conversations of people in town nearly a mile away. The scent of pine and morning dew from outside penetrated the clinic's walls as if they were made of paper, bringing with it layers of information about the forest's inhabitants and their nocturnal activities. Victoria's brown hair had escaped from its ponytail during the night, the strands now seeming to catch light differently, as if infused with some inner radiance. She caught her reflection in the metal surface of a surgical instrument and gasped. Her green eyes appeared brighter, more vivid, with flecks of gold that hadn't been there before. The changes weren't just sensory. Her entire perception of the world had shifted fundamentally. She could sense the life force of every plant and animal within a significant radius, feel their emotional states as tangible presences in her consciousness. The German shepherd she had treated the previous evening was still recovering in the back kennel, and she could sense its contentment and gratitude as clearly as if the animal had spoken the words aloud. A gentle knock on the front door made her jump, her newly heightened reflexes causing her to move with startling speed and grace. It wasn't the heavy footsteps of the hunters from the previous night, but something more cautious, more human. Victoria approached slowly, noticing she could hear the visitors breathing through the solid wood, something impossible until a few hours ago. The rhythm was steady, controlled, but she detected an underlying tension that suggested the person was fighting to remain calm. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a man who took her breath away. Tall, easily 6 feet 4 inches, with wavy black hair that caught the morning sunlight and skin bronzed by years of outdoor living. His build suggested both strength and agility, the kind of physical conditioning that came from a lifetime of surviving in harsh wilderness conditions. But it was his eyes that left her paralyzed. Golden, exactly the same impossible shade she had seen in the wounded wolf. Those eyes held depths of experience and pain that spoke of years spent living on the edge of survival. There were faint lines around them, suggesting he was perhaps in his early 30s, though something ancient in his gaze made him seem both older and timelessly youthful. "Victoria," he said with a deep, warm voice that resonated in places of her soul she didn't know existed. The way he spoke her name carried an intimacy that should have been impossible between strangers, yet felt completely natural. "I'm Blake Grayson. I believe it's time you knew the truth." The name vibrated in her chest with a mixture of fear and inexplicable recognition. There was something in the way he looked at her, as if he could see directly through to her soul, that made her step back. His presence filled the doorway and seemed to extend beyond his physical form, creating an aura of power that made the air itself feel charged with electricity. "Who are you?" she asked with a trembling voice, though deep in her heart she already knew the answer. "I'm the wolf you saved last night," he whispered, taking a step forward with the fluid grace of a predator. His movements were economical and precise, suggesting someone accustomed to conserving energy while remaining ready for instant action. "I know you only saw the beast, but I want you to know me as a man. My name is Blake, and now our lives are intertwined forever." Disbelief fought against a primitive certainty growing in her chest. Something in the air changed when he spoke, an electric energy that made every nerve ending in her body come alive. She could smell his essence with startling clarity: pine needles and mountain air, damp earth after rain, and something wild and untamed that made her pulse quicken. Beneath these natural scents lay something uniquely him, a masculine warmth that spoke to parts of her consciousness she hadn't known existed. "Intertwined," she stammered. The words seemed to have an ancient, powerful echo that reverberated through her bones. "I don't understand what that means." Blake moved closer, and Victoria noticed the scars her stitches had left on his neck and shoulders, now healed with supernatural speed. The wounds that had been life-threatening mere hours ago were now pink lines barely visible against his skin. His muscular frame filled the doorway, and she could see the raw power contained within his human form, power that had somehow been transferred to her through their connection. "Saving me during the blood moon wasn't just an act of medical mercy," he explained patiently, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "According to the ancestral laws of my people, your blood and mine have been linked by a bond that transcends the physical realm. The moment you chose to heal rather than flee, to protect rather than expose, you activated a connection that has existed between guardians and our kind for millennia. From that moment, you were marked, bound to my existence. That's why I came looking for you." Victoria sank into a chair, feeling her world reconstructing itself in disturbing ways. The furniture around her seemed more solid, more real than before, as if she were seeing everything with enhanced clarity. Suddenly, Distant voices in the town seemed clearer. She could distinguish individual conversations, emotional undertones, even detect lies and truths in people's words. The forest aromas intensified until they became a complete olfactory map, allowing her to track the movements of wildlife with startling precision. "Marked means I'm no longer completely human?" she asked in a thread of voice, her hands exploring her own face as if it belonged to a stranger. Her skin felt different, warmer, more sensitive, as if every cell had been awakened to new possibilities. "It means you now possess capabilities that go beyond human limitations," Blake responded, his voice charged with protective tenderness. "Enhanced senses, increased strength and speed, accelerated healing, and most importantly, the ability to bridge the gap between our worlds. But it also means your life is in mortal danger." A chill ran through her body despite the morning warmth. The memory of the armed hunters with their empty eyes and threatening rifles appeared vividly in her mind. Their systematic search, their military precision, their absolute certainty that they were hunting something that needed to be destroyed. All of it took on new meaning now. "The Order of the Iron Cross," she said suddenly, surprising herself by knowing the name without him having mentioned it. The words tasted metallic on her tongue, carrying connotations of fear and hatred that made her stomach turn. Blake's golden eyes hardened with controlled fury, and for a moment, she glimpsed the predator that lurked beneath his human facade. "How do you know that name?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted, putting her hands to her head as fragments of knowledge that weren't hers began filtering through her consciousness. "It just appeared in my mind when you spoke of danger." "The connection is already working," he murmured, wonder and concern warring in his expression. "You can access some of my knowledge and memories. The Order is a group of fanatics that has hunted my people for centuries. They believe the existence of beings like me is an abomination that must be eliminated from the world." Victoria felt a wave of images that weren't hers flooding through her mind. Forests in flames under cover of night, the terrified screams of innocence, the acrid smell of burned silver and spilled blood. Blake's memories filtered toward her like water through a broken dam, showing her glimpses of his childhood in the mountains, the brutal loss of his pack to Order raids, years of running and hiding from relentless hunters who saw his kind as monsters to be systematically exterminated. She saw through his eyes the faces of friends and family who had fallen to silver bullets, felt his grief and rage as if they were her own emotions. The weight of centuries of persecution pressed down on her consciousness, making her understand the true scope of the war being waged in the shadows. "And humans who know about you, they kill them without exception," she stated, the knowledge flowing from their shared connection with horrible clarity. He nodded with gravity, his expression darkening. "They consider any human who knows of our existence a threat that must be permanently silenced. Knowledge of our world is considered a contagion that must be stopped before it spreads." The reality of her situation settled over her like a lead blanket. She could no longer return to her simple life as a rural veterinarian, treating sick cattle and performing routine surgeries. The hunters would return, and when they did, there would be no place to hide, no innocent explanation that would save her. "How much time do we have before they come for me?" she asked, surprising herself with the calmness in her own voice. "Not much," Blake admitted, but his tone carried determination rather than despair. "But you're not alone in this. My pack may have scattered to the four winds, but I still have allies in these mountains. Solitary wolves who understand what it means to live on the margins of both worlds, outcasts who've learned to survive against impossible odds." At that moment, a distant howl resonated among the trees, followed by another and another. The sound carried layers of meaning that her enhanced senses could now interpret. Victoria felt it not just with her ears, but with something deeper, a part of her consciousness that could now decode the complex communications of the pack. "What are they saying?" she whispered, her voice filled with wonder at this new ability. "They're warning us," Blake responded, his body tensing like a coiled spring ready for action. "The hunters have returned to town. They're asking about you specifically, and they won't accept another lie. They know something happened here last night." Victoria stood, feeling for the first time supernatural strength flowing through her muscles like liquid fire. She was no longer the same woman who had closed the clinic the night before, exhausted from 18 hours of routine veterinary work. She was something new, something dangerous, something the hunters feared enough to want to destroy before it could fully awaken. "Then I suppose it's time to run," she said, walking toward the closet where she kept her emergency supplies and go-bag. "Not run," Blake corrected, his eyes shining with fierce determination and something else. Hope. It's time to fight. Chapter 3. Ancestral Secrets. The morning light barely illuminated the dusty corners of the basement in the old house Victoria Stone had inherited from her grandmother in the Wyoming mountains. The woman, always discreet and protective, had never mentioned anything about her family's hidden past. But that morning, guided by the persistent humming in her amplified senses and the urgency to understand her new supernatural reality, Victoria descended with firm steps toward that forbidden space. The wooden stairs, eaten away by time and neglect, creaked under her feet with a sound she could now hear with supernatural clarity, each fiber responding to her weight like a whisper from the past. The walls, covered with thick dust that floated in rays of dying sunlight, were adorned with ancient portraits, whose gazes seemed to follow her every movement, with a disturbing mixture of protection and guarded secrets. The air in the basement smelled of history, old paper, damp wood, and something more subtle that her newly awakened senses identified as the residual aroma of ancient rituals and ancestral magic. Her fingers trembled as she explored every corner with the desperation of someone seeking answers to questions she didn't yet know how to formulate. Victoria's brown hair caught the filtered light as she moved through the space, her enhanced vision allowing her to see details that would have been invisible to her human eyes just days before. Every shadow held potential secrets. Every corner promised revelations about the legacy she had unknowingly inherited. Reaching the back of the basement, a particular section of the wall called her attention. It wasn't so much what she saw, but what she felt, an almost imperceptible vibration, as if the wood itself held pulsating secrets. The panel appeared identical to the rest, but her new senses detected a difference in density, in the echo it produced when tapped gently. Her trembling fingers explored the surface until she felt a small groove hidden among the natural grain of the wood. A firm push, guided more by instinct than logic, revealed a secret compartment that had remained sealed for decades. The mechanism was so cleverly concealed that only someone with supernatural senses could have detected the subtle variations in the wood's texture and density. Inside rested several ancient scrolls and letters wrapped carefully with a fine silk ribbon that bore an embroidered wolf in golden and silver threads that gleamed faintly even in the gloom. Victoria inhaled deeply, feeling how the aroma of aged paper and dried ink awakened memories that weren't hers, echoes of generations that had guarded these secrets. When she unfolded the first scroll with hands that now possessed supernatural delicacy, Victoria found herself captured by words written in elegant calligraphy that narrated forgotten pacts between humans and wolves. The texts described the Guardians, a special line of humans gifted with the unique faculty to connect deeply with shapeshifters, protect them from external threats, and maintain the delicate balance between both worlds. Her heart beat with a force that seemed to echo throughout the empty house. Each word she read resonated within her like a recognized truth, a piece of a puzzle that finally found its place. The scrolls contained detailed accounts of heroic sacrifices, battles fought in secret for centuries, and a sacred oath that each guardian must pronounce to protect the lineage and maintain the protective veil that separated both worlds. The prophecy that most shook her was written in a solemn tone that seemed to vibrate with ancestral power. When the last guardian awakens under the shadow of a blood moon, the millennial balance will be restored or destroyed forever, and her choice will determine the fate of both races. The words seemed to burn into her retina, resonating in her mind with an echo that came from remote times and pointed toward a destiny she now understood as inevitable. The weight of this revelation pressed down on her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility she had never asked for, but was genetically destined to bear. Among all the letters, one especially worn by time and careful handling called her attention particularly. It was addressed specifically to her, written with the firm but loving calligraphy she recognized from the notes her grandmother used to leave her as a child. The paper was yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to a soft brown, suggesting it had been written many years ago. In that letter, The elderly woman explained with painful detail the fundamental role of their family as protectors of forbidden truth, imploring Victoria to care for the family legacy so that the Order of the Iron Cross could not find and destroy the last guardians. Each word carried the weight of generations of sacrifice and secrecy. But it was the final paragraph that made her blood freeze. "My dear granddaughter, you must know that your parents' death was not the accident we made you believe. Klaus Ironheart, the Order's commander, discovered our location 15 years ago. Your father and mother died protecting you, knowing you were the last hope of our lineage. Forgive them for lying to you, and forgive me for not being strong enough to protect them." The scroll slipped from her numb hands as the truth hit her like an avalanche. Her parents hadn't died in a car accident on a mountain road during a winter storm, as she had always been told. They had been murdered, assassinated for protecting her, for guarding a secret that now ran through her veins like liquid fire. Victoria remembered that terrible night 15 years ago when she was 13. She had been staying with her grandmother for the weekend when the call came. The story had always been that her parents' car had skidded on black ice while returning from a veterinary conference in Denver. Now she understood that the conference had been a cover story, and the accident had been a carefully orchestrated execution. As she assimilated this devastating revelation, the connection with Blake intensified suddenly until it became an overwhelming torrent. Images, emotions, and memories that didn't belong to her invaded her consciousness with startling vividness. Ancestral ceremonies illuminated by the moon, pacts sealed with blood that gleamed like molten metal, the eternal struggle between light and darkness that had defined centuries of hidden history. She saw through Blake's eyes moments of his own escape from Order raids. Klaus personally directing human hunts, the iron cross he wore on his chest gleaming with a metal that wasn't completely earthly, the cold smile on his face when he ordered the execution of entire families, whose only crime had been knowing too much about the supernatural world. The visions showed her the true scope of the Order's operations. Safe houses burned to the ground with families still inside, children separated from their shapeshifter parents and raised in Order facilities to become hunters themselves, ancient forests cleared to eliminate hiding places, and worst of all, the systematic corruption of local law enforcement to ensure no investigations would ever reveal the truth. With the reading finished, and the implications settling in her mind like heavy stones, Victoria understood that her role in this hidden war would be absolutely vital. She wasn't just a victim of circumstances or a random human who had stumbled into supernatural events. She was the culmination of a lineage that had fought for millennia to maintain peace between two worlds that could destroy each other. The prophecy spoke of balance being restored or destroyed forever, and now she realized the choice was hers to make. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. The survival of both species might depend on decisions she had yet to understand how to make. But before she could fully process everything she had discovered, a familiar chill ran down her spine. The persistent humming she had learned to recognize as her internal warning system transformed into an urgent alarm that made every muscle in her body tense. The enhanced awareness that came with her guardian abilities was screaming that danger was approaching rapidly. The Order was close, dangerously close, and this time they weren't coming just to ask questions or conduct routine searches. Through her connection with Blake, she could sense his own alarm as he detected the approaching threat from his position in the mountains. With determination that seemed inherited from generations of guardians, Victoria quickly ascended the basement stairs and grabbed her cell phone. It was time to share these discoveries with Blake, to prepare for what was coming, and to finally accept the destiny she had been avoiding her entire life. "Blake," she said with a firm voice when he answered on the first ring, her enhanced hearing picking up the tension in his breathing, even through the phone connection. "I found everything. My grandmother's letters, my family's history. We're guardians, and I'm the last of my lineage. But there's something more. Klaus killed my parents 15 years ago. This isn't just a random hunt. It's personal." The silence on the other end filled with a tension she could feel through their supernatural connection. A mixture of rage, protectiveness, and grim understanding. "That explains everything," Blake murmured finally, his voice carrying the weight of terrible comprehension. "The intensity of the pursuit, the resources they're investing, They don't just want to eliminate you for being a threat. They want to finish what they started with your family. At that moment, the sound of vehicles approaching on the gravel road reached her amplified ears. Through the window, she could see the shadowy figures of at least 6 armed men surrounding the house with the military precision she had learned to fear. Their movements were coordinated and efficient, suggesting they had been planning this assault for some time. "I have to go now," she whispered into the phone while grabbing a backpack and starting to stuff the most important scrolls inside. "They're here. Meet me in the forest behind your house." Blake responded with urgency, his protective instincts flaring through their bond. "I know a safe place where we can plan our next move." As she closed the backpack and headed toward the back door, Victoria felt that something fundamental had changed within her. She was no longer the rural veterinarian who had saved a wounded wolf out of compassion. She was the last guardian of an ancestral lineage, the culmination of a millennial prophecy, and the only person who could prevent Klaus Ironheart from completing the genocide he had begun with her parents' murder. The war had been declared long before she was born, but now she finally had the weapons to fight back. Chapter 4. Flight Through Shadow's Night had fallen like a heavy shroud over the small village where Victoria Stone had lived her entire life. But now this familiar place had transformed into hostile territory. The humidity-laden air carried not only the aroma of wet earth and pine, but also the metallic scent of approaching danger. Her amplified senses captured every sound: the cracking of branches under military boots, the metallic clicking of weapons being prepared, and the whispered voices of men coordinating a lethal assault. Klaus and his hunters had arrived with the precision of a military operation. Through the back window of the clinic, Victoria could count at least 8 figures moving with tactical discipline around the building. They carried equipment that gleamed with silver reflections under the moonlight, modified rifles, knives that emanated an unnatural glow, and light armor that whispered promises of death for any supernatural creature. The hunters moved with the efficiency of seasoned professionals, each man knowing his role in what was clearly a well-rehearsed operation. Victoria could see through her enhanced vision that their weapons weren't standard hunting equipment. These were specialized tools designed specifically for killing shapeshifters. The silver ammunition would cause wounds that wouldn't heal with supernatural speed, and the tactical formation they employed suggested extensive training in hunting prey that was faster and stronger than normal humans. "We can't stay here," Blake murmured, his voice barely audible as he observed the hunters' movements from the surgery room. "They've brought enough firepower to eliminate an entire pack." His golden eyes tracked each hunter's position with predatory precision, calculating angles and distances with the instinct of someone who had survived countless similar situations. Victoria could feel his tension through their bond. Not fear, but the coiled readiness of an apex predator preparing for battle. The first shot pierced the main window like a thunderclap, immediately followed by the tinkling of crystals falling like deadly rain. Victoria crouched instinctively, feeling how adrenaline transformed her fear into supernatural clarity that allowed her to calculate distances, evaluate escape routes, and anticipate enemy movements with startling accuracy. "Through the back door, now!" Blake shouted, taking her hand with a strength that surprised her with its gentleness despite the urgency. They ran through the clinic that had been her sanctuary, dodging bullets that whistled centimeters from their heads and leaving behind years of work dedicated to saving lives. The medical instruments shattered in their wake, creating a destructive symphony that marked the end of her previous life. The examining tables she had used to treat countless animals became obstacles in their desperate flight, and the certificates on the walls, proof of her dedication to healing, were reduced to fragments by stray bullets. As they exited through the back door, Victoria felt a sharp pain in her left arm. A silver blade, thrown with lethal precision by one of the hunters, had found its target. The wound wasn't deep, but within seconds fever rose, and an icy chill ran through her arm. The metal burned under her skin, and Victoria could barely stay on her feet as weakness struck her relentlessly, as if every fiber of her being violently rejected the contact. The silver felt like liquid fire coursing through her bloodstream, attacking not just her physical form, but something deeper. The supernatural essence that was still developing within her. Her enhanced senses, which had been growing stronger by the hour, suddenly dimmed as the toxic metal interfered with her evolving abilities. "Silver," Blake murmured with horror upon seeing the blood flowing from the wound. "We have to get away from here immediately." The flight through the forest became a nightmare of scratching branches, treacherous roots that threatened to trip them, and the constant fear of being caught by their pursuers. But Blake moved with the supernatural grace of someone born for these wild terrains, guiding her along paths only he knew, using knowledge accumulated during years of life as a fugitive. His intimate knowledge of the landscape showed in every choice of direction. He led them along deer trails that would muffle their footsteps, through streams that would confuse scent tracking, and around natural obstacles that would slow their pursuers, while providing them with cover. The moon overhead seemed to illuminate their path just enough to help Blake navigate, while keeping them hidden from human eyes. "The cabin is close," he panted as they jumped over a frozen stream. "There we'll be safe, at least temporarily." The refuge appeared among the trees like a promise of salvation. A solid structure built with logs from centennial trees, covered by moss and vines that made it practically invisible to untrained eyes. The smoke rising from the chimney spoke of occupants who were waiting for them. Victoria could smell the welcoming aromas of burning wood and cooking food, suggesting this was more than just an emergency shelter. It was a true home. Luna emerged from the darkness before they could touch the door. She was a middle-aged woman whose presence emanated natural authority, born from decades of surviving on the margins of both worlds. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, immediately evaluated the situation, while her nose wrinkled upon detecting the smell of burned silver. Her appearance was that of someone who had learned to live entirely self-sufficiently. Her clothes were practical and well-maintained, her hair streaked with premature gray that spoke of stress and hardship, and her hands showed the calluses of someone accustomed to physical labor. But there was also something regal about her bearing, a dignity that suggested she had once held a position of significant authority. "Come in quickly," she ordered, her voice charged with genuine concern. "The hunters won't dare approach this place, but we can't take risks either." The cabin's interior was functional but welcoming. Animal skins covered the wooden floor, medicinal herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and a crackling fire provided both warmth and illumination. Other exiled wolves occupied shadowy corners, their eyes glowing with the caution of those who had learned to distrust everything unknown. Victoria could sense their wariness through her developing abilities. These were survivors who had lost everything to the Order's persecution, and they viewed any newcomer as a potential threat. Their pack bonds had been broken by violence and loss, leaving them suspicious even of other shapeshifters. Luna examined Victoria's wound with expert hands that had treated countless similar injuries. Her face darkened as she explored the edges of the lesion, where the skin had acquired an unnatural grayish tint. "Pure silver, forged specifically to kill shapeshifters," she diagnosed with a somber voice. "But you're not completely a shapeshifter yet, so the poison will act more slowly. That gives us time, but not much." The clinical assessment carried the weight of experience. Luna had clearly seen this type of injury before, had watched the progression of silver poisoning in both humans and shapeshifters. Her matter-of-fact tone couldn't hide the underlying concern in her voice. "Poison?" Victoria asked, feeling how the pain spread from the wound toward the rest of her arm like icy fingers. "Silver doesn't just cut, it corrupts," Luna explained, while preparing ointments that filled the air with aromas of plants Victoria didn't recognize. "It infiltrates the bloodstream, attacking the very essence of what we are. For humans, it's simply toxic. For shapeshifters, it's a slow and agonizing death." Blake approached, taking Victoria's uninjured hand in his. Through their connection, she could feel his guilt, his fear of losing her, and something deeper, an iron determination to save her regardless of the cost. "There is a solution," Luna continued, but her tone suggested complications. "A complete bond between you two would neutralize the poison and strengthen Victoria for the battles ahead. But the process is extremely dangerous for humans." The weight of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Victoria could feel the gazes of the other exiled wolves, evaluating whether it was worth risking their lives for someone who might not survive the night. "What kind of dangers?" Victoria inquired, though she already sensed the answer wouldn't please her. "The bonding ritual transforms the body at a cellular level. Approximately 70% of humans don't survive the process, Luna explained with brutal honesty. Their systems simply can't adapt to the changes. Those who do survive emerge different, stronger, but no longer completely human. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with implications none of those present dared verbalize. Victoria could sense the mixture of hope and resignation in the room. Hope that she might be strong enough to survive, resignation that they might lose another potential ally to the cruel mathematics of supernatural transformation. "How much time do I have to decide?" she asked finally. "The poison will move slowly during the next few hours, but once it reaches your heart..." Luna left the sentence unfinished, but the message was clear. Blake squeezed her hand tighter, and through their connection, Victoria felt a wave of emotions. Fierce love, absolute protectiveness, and the silent promise that they would face any consequence together. "You don't have to decide now," he murmured, "but I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll be with you until the end." Victoria looked around her, the cabin full of exiles who had found family on the margins of society. Luna, whose expert hands offered hope amid desperation, and Blake, whose presence had become her anchor in this impossible world. Outside, the wind howled among the trees like ancestral voices, reminding her that decisions made in darkness often determine destiny under the light. The wound in her arm pulsed with pain that intensified with each heartbeat, a constant reminder that time was running out. But for the first time since she had saved a wounded wolf on a stormy night, Victoria didn't feel alone. She was surrounded by creatures who understood what it meant to live between two worlds, and she had found in Blake not just a protector, but a companion willing to share the risks of an uncertain future. The decision, when the moment came to make it, would define not only her survival, but also what kind of person, or creature, she would become in the battles ahead. Chapter 5. Dangerous Union. The shadows in the small cabin seemed to shorten with each second Victoria Stone spent staring at the crackling fire that cast dancing reflections in her eyes. The blood moon remained high in the sky, its reddish light tinting the world outside like an omen, an indelible mark that was now part of her destiny. Every moment, every breath felt charged with ancestral weight, a reminder that nothing would be the same after this night. The minutes before the bonding ritual were an emotional whirlwind for Victoria. Primal fear and uncertainty competed with hope and determination born from the palpable connection she now shared with Blake Grayson. His golden eyes, filled with warmth that seemed to defy the darkness itself, watched her with tenderness and firmness, aware of the magnitude of the step they were about to take together. The silver poison continued its slow advance through her system, each pulse of her heart carrying the toxin deeper into her bloodstream. Victoria could feel her human strength ebbing away, replaced by a strange lightness that she knew wasn't entirely natural. Her brown hair had taken on an almost luminous quality in the firelight, as if her body was already beginning to respond to the supernatural forces at work within her. "There's no going back," Blake whispered, his voice resonating with gravity that silenced the fire's crackling. "This bond will seal our fate. The strength of our union will be our shield and armor against the storm that's coming." Victoria felt a knot in her throat, but nodded with resolution, accepting the reality of her new role as guardian of the ancestral bond. She sat facing Blake, fixing her gaze on his eyes, seeking in them a promise of protection and unbreakable alliance. Luna, whose countenance reflected centuries of wisdom and pain, began to intone a chant in an ancestral language that seemed to make the very fibers of the air vibrate. The ancient words resonated with primitive power, charging the room with an almost tangible energy that enveloped Victoria and Blake in a protective and transformative mantle. The other exiled wolves in the cabin formed a loose circle around them, their presence adding to the ritual's power while serving as witnesses to this ancient ceremony. Victoria could sense their mixed emotions through her developing abilities. Hope that she would survive, fear that they might lose another potential ally, and something deeper, recognition that they were witnessing something that hadn't occurred in generations. Her senses sharpened exponentially as the chant continued. Perception of the world expanded like ripples in a pond, and time seemed to stop during those crucial moments. The fire crackled with greater intensity, as if responding to the ritual unfolding before it. Victoria felt her body vibrating to the rhythm of the ancestral chant, while an unknown but familiar force coursed through her from the base of her spine to the tip of each finger, awakening neural connections that had remained dormant throughout her human life. Blake extracted from his bag a piece of black obsidian, perfectly sharp, whose polished surface reflected the fire's golden glow, like a mirror that guarded millennial secrets. The stone seemed to pulse with its own life, radiating energy Victoria could feel even before it touched her. "This stone symbolizes our eternal bond," he declared, while gently pressing it against Victoria's extended palm. "It has been blessed by generations of guardians before you, and now it will seal our shared destiny." The pain from the cut was immediate, intense, and completely different from any wound she had experienced. It wasn't just a physical sting, but an electric tremor that spread through every nerve ending, marking the beginning of a transformation that transcended the merely corporal. The obsidian seemed to drink her blood, the dark stone gleaming with an inner light as her life essence touched its surface. Blake replicated the ritual cut on his own hand with the same solemnity, then intertwined their wounded palms, allowing their blood to mingle in an act that was both symbolic and literally transformative. Victoria could feel the moment their essences touched, a shock of recognition that went beyond the physical, as if two parts of the same soul were finally reuniting. Luna held an ancient silver chalice filled with water that began to glow with supernatural luminosity, as if it had captured the very essence of the blood moon above. The liquid seemed alive, pulsing with the same rhythm as their joined heartbeats. When she poured the luminescent liquid over their intertwined hands, the chant increased in intensity and complexity, creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions Victoria was just beginning to perceive. The vital energy current she felt was overwhelming. It moved through her entire circulatory system like liquid electricity, awakening ancestral memories that seemed to be encoded in her DNA itself. Each cell in her body illuminated with new vitality, strengthening and adapting for the supernatural challenges that awaited her. "What's happening to me?" she asked between gasps, her voice broken by the transformation's intensity. The world had become exponentially more vivid and sensory. Sounds amplified until they became a symphony of information. She could hear the synchronized beating of all hearts present, the whisper of wind through leaves kilometers away, even the whispered conversations of nocturnal animals in the surrounding forest. Smells acquired completely new dimensions, becoming olfactory maps that allowed her to track emotions, intentions, and the presence of other supernatural beings. The emotions of those present became palpable like textures in the air, creating an emotional landscape she could navigate with the same ease as a physical map. "You're awakening to your true nature as a guardian," Luna responded with a maternal smile charged with pride and expectation. "This is just the beginning of the journey toward becoming what you've always been destined to be." The days following the ritual were a roller coaster of marvelous discoveries and painful adaptations. Victoria experienced radical changes that went far beyond enhanced physical capabilities. Her sight could now focus on microscopic details from impossible distances. Her sense of smell mapped emotional territories, and her new physical strength seemed to multiply with each passing day. But perhaps the most profound change was the supernatural connection she now shared with Blake. Through this bond, they could communicate thoughts, share memories, and feel each other's emotions with an intensity that surpassed any form of human intimacy. It was as if their souls had been intertwined at a fundamental level, creating a new entity that was more powerful than the sum of its individual parts. The connection allowed them to function as a perfect unit. When Blake moved, Victoria anticipated his actions. When she felt threatened, he sensed the danger before she could articulate it. Their thoughts flowed between them like water, creating a constant dialogue that operated below the level of conscious awareness. One night, while meditating by the fire trying to process all these overwhelming changes, Victoria felt something completely unexpected through her new supernatural connection. It was like an invisible network extending throughout the region, connecting her not only with Blake, but with all the shape-shifting wolves within a radius of several kilometers. She could sense their presences like pulsing points of light on a three-dimensional mental map. This discovery opened her awareness to the true scope of the shapeshifter community, far larger and more complex than she had imagined. Each point of light represented not just a location, but a complete individual with their own history. fears, hopes, and dreams. She could sense the young ones learning to control their transformations, the elders carrying the weight of decades of persecution, and the families trying to raise children in a world that would kill them if their true nature were discovered. But among all these familiar and reassuring presences, there was one that deeply disturbed her. It was a somber light, charged with self-loathing and rage that seemed directed against its own nature. The presence radiated darkness that contrasted violently with the warmth of the other exiled wolves. When Klaus appeared in the nearby forest just hours later, leading a carefully planned ambush, Victoria immediately recognized him through her new supernatural perception. The commander of the Order of the Iron Cross wasn't simply a human fanatic hunting creatures he feared. He was one of them, a shapeshifter who had developed such deep hatred toward his own nature that he had dedicated his existence to exterminating all of his species. "It's him," she whispered to Blake, her voice charged with shock and horror. "Klaus isn't human. I can sense him in the network. He's a wolf who hates himself so much that he's sworn to destroy all of us." The discovery changed everything. The war they faced wasn't simply a religious crusade against the supernatural. It was the genocide project of a tortured being who had chosen self-destruction as a way to deal with his own shape-shifting nature. Blake squeezed her hand firmly, transmitting through their bond a mixture of protective determination and controlled fury. "Then we know exactly what kind of enemy we're dealing with, and that gives us the advantage we needed." As they prepared to face this new revelation, Victoria felt her transformation complete at another level. She was no longer the human veterinarian who had saved a wounded wolf out of compassion. She had become something entirely new, a hybrid guardian with the ability to navigate between both worlds, protect her own, and perhaps find a way to heal even enemies as lost as Klaus. The battle ahead would be both physical and spiritual, and Victoria finally felt prepared for both. The ritual had not only saved her life and neutralized the silver poison, it had awakened abilities she was only beginning to understand, connecting her to a network of power and responsibility that stretched back through generations of guardians. The blood moon above seemed to pulse in rhythm with her new heartbeat, marking not an end, but a beginning. Victoria Stone, the last guardian of an ancient lineage, was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Chapter 6. Poisoned Truths. The dawn of the fourth day arrived tinted with tension that Victoria Stone could feel vibrating in every fiber of her transformed being. The supernatural connection she had developed after the bonding ritual allowed her to track shapeshifter presences across kilometers of mountainous territory. And that morning, the somber and tortured presence she had identified as Klaus was moving with deliberate purpose toward the valley where the region's main water source was located. "Is he executing some kind of plan?" Victoria murmured, closing her eyes to concentrate better on the signals she received through her supernatural network. "I can feel his rage. But there's something more. Determination. As if he's fulfilling a mission he's been planning for years." Blake Grayson tensed beside her, his own lupine instincts alerting him to dangers he couldn't yet fully identify. The morning had begun peacefully at the refuge cabin, but now both sensed that an inevitable confrontation was approaching. "Then it's time to confront him," Blake declared, his golden eyes shining with fierce determination. "We've been running and hiding too long. If Klaus has a plan that threatens the entire region, we need to stop him now." They moved through the forest with the silent grace Victoria had developed after her transformation, following Klaus's emotional trail like an invisible thread that guided them toward his location. The terrain became more rugged as they approached the natural springs that fed the regional water system. With each step, Victoria could feel Klaus's presence becoming more intense and disturbed. The scent of pine and mountain air carried undertones that her enhanced senses could interpret, traces of metal, anger, and something else that made her stomach turn. Klaus had been preparing something, and whatever it was, it reeked of death and corruption. When they finally found him, Klaus Ironheart stood beside a rocky formation that protected the main spring, manipulating something that gleamed with an unnatural silver glow under the morning light. He was a middle-aged man, whose face showed the scars of decades of internal conflict, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and determination that was disturbing, even to Victoria's enhanced senses. His appearance spoke of a man who had been consumed by his obsession, gaunt cheeks that suggested poor eating habits, premature gray streaking his dark hair, and the rigid posture of someone who had spent years carrying an enormous emotional burden. But there was also something predatory about him, a controlled violence that reminded Victoria that despite his self-hatred, he was still a dangerous shapeshifter. "Klaus!" Blake shouted, emerging from among the trees with Victoria at his side. "Stop now, before you do something you can't take back." The Order's commander turned slowly, a bitter smile curving his lips when he saw the couple that had been eluding him for days. In his hands, he held a container filled with liquid that looked like molten silver, radiating toxic energy that made both Victoria and Blake instinctively step back. The substance in the container seemed alive, pulsing with malevolent energy that made Victoria's new senses scream warnings. This wasn't ordinary silver. It was something far more dangerous, something that had been corrupted and enhanced beyond natural properties. "Victoria Stone," Klaus said, his voice charged with disturbing familiarity. "The last guardian, and Blake Grayson, the solitary alpha who thinks he can protect her. You've arrived just in time to witness the end of this curse that has plagued these mountains for centuries." "What curse are you talking about?" Victoria asked, using her new perception to evaluate Klaus's emotions. What she found surprised her. There wasn't just hatred in him, but deep pain and guilt that seemed to consume him from within. Klaus laughed, but the sound completely lacked humor. "They haven't told you, have they? You don't know why a shapeshifter like me dedicates his life to exterminating his own species." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Through her supernatural connection, she could now sense Klaus's divided nature with greater clarity. He was a shape-shifting wolf who had developed such profound hatred toward his own nature that he radiated self-loathing like a contagious disease. 20 years ago, Klaus continued, his voice taking on a distant and painful tone, "I was like you. I had a mate, a beautiful woman named Elena who was my entire world. We lived in a small community in these same valleys, trying to maintain balance between our two natures." Blake tensed, recognizing the genuine pain in his enemy's voice, but remaining alert for any sudden movement. Victoria could sense through their bond that Blake had heard stories like this before, tales of love lost to the dangers inherent in their dual nature. "What happened to Elena?" Victoria asked, though part of her feared the answer. "An ancient curse," Klaus responded, looking at the silver liquid in his hands as if it were pure poison. Something that had been sleeping in these mountains for centuries awakened and began corrupting the shapeshifters in the region. One by one, they lost control over their transformations, becoming permanent beasts that attacked both humans and other wolves. His voice carried the weight of witnessed horror, of someone who had seen loved ones transformed into monsters beyond recognition or redemption. Victoria could feel through her empathic abilities the genuine anguish that had driven Klaus to his current crusade. Klaus's eyes filled with anguish that was palpable even at a distance. Elena was one of the first to be infected. For weeks I fought to find a cure, to save her from what she was becoming. But the curse was stronger than my love, more powerful than any medicine or ritual I could attempt. The memory seemed to physically pain him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of old grief, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the container. Victoria could sense layers of trauma, guilt, and desperate love that had curdled into something toxic over 2 decades of festering. Victoria felt her heart contract with compassion, finally understanding the source of Klaus's torment. "You had to kill her," she whispered, the realization hitting her with brutal force. "To save everyone else," Klaus confirmed, his voice breaking slightly. "To stop the curse's spread before it consumed the entire region. Elena begged me to do it, to free her from the horror she had become. And I loved her enough to give her that peace." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a tragedy that transcended divisions between species. Even Blake, who had arrived prepared for battle, found himself moved by Klaus's story. "But that doesn't justify what you're doing now," Blake said finally. "Genocide isn't the answer to personal pain." Klaus's eyes hardened, momentary compassion being replaced by iron determination. "Isn't it?" he asked, raising the container of liquid silver. "After killing Elena, I swore I would never allow another being to suffer as she suffered. The only way to guarantee that is to eliminate our species completely from this world. That's wrong, Victoria protested. Not all shapeshifters are cursed. Most live in peace, helping maintain natural balance. We all carry the seed of corruption, Klaus replied with bitterness. We're all beasts waiting for the moment to lose control. I myself have felt the call of darkness every day for 20 years. He began moving toward the spring, clearly preparing to pour the silver poison into the water. This liquid isn't simple silver, Klaus explained. It's been forged with ancient rituals, designed to bind with water itself and multiply like a plague. A single drop can contaminate entire kilometers of springs, spreading to other communities, other regions. In 1 generation, we'll have purified the entire continent. The true horror of his plan became clear to Victoria. This wasn't just about killing the local shapeshifter population. It was about systematic genocide on an unprecedented scale. You can't do this, Blake shouted, moving to intercept Klaus. The confrontation that followed was fierce but brief. Klaus, despite his conflicted nature, remained an experienced warrior with decades of military training. When Blake lunged toward him, Klaus used a hidden silver dagger to open a deep wound in the Alpha's side, exactly where he knew it would cause maximum damage without being immediately lethal. Blake collapsed, his blood staining the grass as he struggled to remain conscious. The scent of silver-burning shapeshifter flesh filled the air with a nauseating smell that made Victoria feel physically sick. "Blake!" she screamed, running toward her wounded companion, but Klaus was already moving toward the spring. "Choose, Guardian," Klaus said with a cold voice. "Chase me and try to stop the inevitable, or stay to save your mate. But you can't do both." The dilemma tore Victoria apart inside. Through their bond, she could feel Blake's life weakening with each passing second. The silver wound was poisoning his system, and he needed immediate medical attention to survive. But she also knew that if Klaus poured that poison into the water, thousands of innocent shapeshifters would die in agony. Klaus took advantage of her momentary indecision to reach the spring's edge, the container of liquid silver gleaming threateningly in his hands. "This is for you, Elena," he murmured, preparing to complete the mission that had consumed 2 decades of his life. "Finally, you'll be able to rest in peace, knowing no one else will suffer as you suffered." Victoria made the most difficult decision of her life. She ran to Blake, using her medical knowledge and new abilities to stabilize his wound enough to keep him alive. Her hands glowed with golden energy she had never experienced before. A physical manifestation of her guardian powers that managed to slow the silver poison's spread. When she finally looked toward the spring, Klaus had disappeared, but the damage was already done. The water had acquired an unnatural silver tint, and Victoria could feel through her supernatural connection how shapeshifters throughout the region began experiencing the first symptoms of poisoning. The war had officially begun, and Klaus had achieved the first devastating blow. But as she held Blake in her arms, feeling his life slowly stabilize under her healing touch, Victoria swore she would find a way to reverse the damage and make Klaus pay for his betrayal of his own species. The final battle was approaching, and this time there would be no room for compassion or indecision. Chapter 7. Lunar Sacrifice. The 5th night since Victoria Stone had saved a wounded wolf arrived with the absolute darkness of the new moon, when the sky became a black void that seemed to absorb all hope. It was the most vulnerable night for shapeshifters, when their powers reduced to minimum expression and connection with their lupine nature weakened dangerously. But it was also the night Klaus had chosen to execute the final phase of his genocidal plan. The silver poison he had released into the main spring had spread through the underground water system with terrifying speed. Through her supernatural connection, Victoria could sense how shapeshifters throughout the region began succumbing to the poisoning. First came weakness that forced them to maintain human form, then pains that intensified until becoming pure agony, and finally a slow death that consumed both body and spirit. Luna had been among the first to show symptoms. The healer, who had dedicated decades to healing others, now lay in the refuge cabin with high fever and tremors that shook her entire body. Other exiled wolves arrived constantly seeking shelter, but Victoria knew there was no safe place while the poison continued spreading. The cabin had become a makeshift hospital, with Victoria using every skill she possessed to ease the suffering of the poisoned. Her medical training combined with her guardian abilities allowed her to slow the poison's progress, but she could only treat symptoms, not eliminate the source of the contamination. "How many more will die before we find a solution?" Blake asked, his voice weak but charged with determination. The silver wound Klaus had inflicted was healing slowly, but the Alpha had managed to stay on his feet and help with the refugees. Through their bond, Victoria could feel Blake's pain, not just physical, but emotional. Each death among their people felt like a personal failure, a reminder of his inability to protect those under his care. The weight of leadership, even of scattered exiles, pressed heavily on his shoulders. Victoria closed her eyes, extending her consciousness through the supernatural network that connected all the region's shapeshifters. What she felt filled her with horror. At least 30 wolves had already died, and the number increased every hour. Secondary water sources were also becoming contaminated, creating a domino effect that would soon reach communities that didn't even know shapeshifters existed. "I have to try something," she murmured, moving away from the cabin toward the surrounding forest. "There's a connection between my guardian energy and the poisoning. I can sense it, but I don't completely understand how it works." She ventured into the forest until reaching a small stream that fed one of the contaminated springs. The water, which normally would have been crystalline under starlight, now glowed with an unnatural silver tint that seemed to pulse with its own malevolence. Victoria knelt beside the stream and submerged her hands in the contaminated water. The effect was immediate and devastating. She felt the silver poison attempting to infiltrate her system, burning her new supernatural nerve endings with pain that transcended the physical. But she also felt something else, a resonance between her guardian energy and the poison's molecular structure. "I can purify it," she whispered, realization hitting her like lightning. "My energy can neutralize the silver, but..." She closed her eyes and concentrated, channeling all her vital force toward her submerged hands. The golden energy she had manifested while healing Blake appeared again, but this time with an intensity that threatened to consume her. The water began clearing slowly, the silver tint fading as her power neutralized the poison drop by drop. But the process was draining her in a way she hadn't anticipated. With each second that passed, she could feel her humanity fading, replaced by something more primitive and wild. Her body began changing. Her senses sharpened until becoming almost painful. Her muscles redefined under her skin, and her eyes acquired a permanent golden glow that reflected starlight, like those of a nocturnal predator. The transformation was more profound than anything she had experienced during the bonding ritual. This wasn't just an enhancement of her existing abilities. It was a fundamental alteration of her very essence, trading her human nature for the power needed to save an entire species. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Blake's voice came from behind her, charged with concern and alarm. "The only thing I can do," she responded, without removing her hands from the water. "I can purify the entire system, neutralize the poison before it kills every shapeshifter in the region. But the cost?" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Through their bond, Blake could feel exactly what the process was costing her. Each drop of purified water required a portion of her human essence, transforming her irreversibly into something that was more wolf than person. "Stop," he begged, approaching and placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find another way. You don't have to sacrifice your humanity for us." Victoria looked at him over her shoulder, and Blake could see that her eyes had already changed. They were still beautiful, but now carried ancient wisdom and primitive fierceness of a true alpha. "How many have to die so I can maintain my human form?" she asked. "Luna, the youngsters who are barely learning to control their transformations. Entire families who never hurt anyone." Before Blake could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching reached them through the forest. Klaus had returned, and this time he had brought reinforcements. The lights of multiple military trucks filtered through the trees, accompanied by the coordinated voices of at least 20 Order hunters. "They're taking advantage of the new moon," Blake murmured. "They know we're at our most vulnerable moment." Victoria stood, feeling how the partial transformation had changed her balance and coordination. She was stronger than before, faster, but she could also feel the last vestiges of her humanity fighting against the new nature emerging within her. "Then we have to finish this now," she declared. "We can't keep running while others die from Klaus's poison." The hunters deployed through the forest with military efficiency, using night vision equipment and weapons specially designed to hunt shapeshifters during the new moon. Klaus led the group, his face a mask of iron determination as he coordinated the final assault against the refugees. His tactical expertise showed in every aspect of the operation. The hunters moved in coordinated patterns that eliminated escape routes. Their weapons were loaded with silver ammunition designed for maximum lethality, and their timing took advantage of the shapeshifters' weakest moment in their lunar cycle. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. The surviving wolves, weakened by the new moon, and many already sick from poisoning, fought with the ferocity of those who knew they had nothing left to lose. Blake, despite his injury, transformed into his lupine form and led the defense, using his knowledge of the terrain to compensate for their numerical disadvantage. But Victoria knew the physical battle was just a distraction. The real confrontation would take place in the contaminated water, where she would have to choose between her humanity and the survival of her adopted species. She returned to the stream, ignoring the bullets that whistled centimeters from her head and the combat cries that filled the night. This time, she didn't limit herself to submerging her hands. She waded completely into the contaminated water, allowing the silver poison to touch every centimeter of her skin, while channeling all her guardian energy toward purifying the entire system. The pain was indescribable. She felt the poison attempting to destroy her from within, while her own energy fought to neutralize it, but she also felt her transformation accelerating, as if direct contact with the contaminated silver was catalyzing her evolution toward something completely new. Her skin acquired a golden glow that intensified with each wave of purifying energy. Her muscles completely redefined, granting her strength that rivaled that of the most powerful alphas. Her consciousness expanded to encompass not just the local shapeshifter network, but connections extending across entire continents. "I can sense them all," she murmured, her voice now carrying harmonics that weren't completely human. "Every guardian who ever existed. Every shapeshifter who has fought to protect the balance. I'm not alone in this." The purification extended from the stream toward the main springs, neutralizing Klaus's poison with speed that defied all scientific logic. Through the supernatural network, Victoria could feel the sick shapeshifters beginning to recover, the dying finding new strength, the threatened communities finding hope again. But when she finally emerged from the water, she was no longer the same person who had entered. Her transformation was complete and irreversible. She had saved her adopted species, but the cost had been exactly what she had feared. Her humanity had completely vanished, replaced by something more powerful, but fundamentally different. Klaus, seeing his plan had failed, and the shapeshifters were recovering their strength even under the new moon, ordered the retreat. But before disappearing into the darkness, his eyes met Victoria's across the battlefield. "This isn't over, Guardian," he shouted. "As long as one of us exists, there will always be war." Victoria looked at him with eyes that now shone with ancestral power, and responded with a voice that carried the weight of generations. "Then let it be so, but now the war will be on my terms." As the hunters retreated, and the shapeshifters began celebrating their survival, Victoria remained standing beside the purified stream, contemplating the price of victory and preparing for the new world her sacrifice had created. The transformation was complete. Victoria Stone, the dedicated veterinarian who had saved a wounded wolf out of compassion, had become something entirely new. A guardian who had traded her humanity for the power to protect those who could not protect themselves. The blood moon might have marked the beginning of her journey, but the new moon had witnessed her true birth into a destiny that would reshape the balance between two worlds forever. Chapter 8. Eternal Dawn. 1 week had passed since the night Victoria Stone sacrificed her humanity to save the shapeshifters of the region, and the world felt fundamentally different. The Rocky Mountains, which had once been territory of hunting and survival, now breathed with a peace that hadn't been known for generations. The sanctuary Victoria and Blake Grayson had established in the Wyoming highlands had become something more than a simple refuge. It was a symbol of hope, a place where shapeshifters could live without fear, where wounds both physical and spiritual could heal under the protection of a guardian who had paid the ultimate price for their safety. Victoria's transformation had been complete and irreversible. She was no longer entirely human, nor completely wolf, but something new and powerful that transcended the limitations of both species. Her body radiated golden energy that seemed to connect her directly with the natural forces of the mountains, and her eyes, now permanently bright with supernatural light, could see truths that others barely intuited. Her brown hair had taken on an ethereal quality, catching light in ways that seemed to defy physics, while her enhanced features spoke of the power that flowed through her transformed form. When she moved, there was a grace that belonged neither to human nor wolf, but to something that bridged both worlds with perfect harmony. But what was most remarkable was how she had integrated her medical knowledge with her new supernatural powers. The clinic she had built in the sanctuary's heart was a place where modern science merged with ancestral magic, where wounds that previously would have been fatal to shapeshifters now healed under her luminous hands. The building itself had been constructed using traditional methods, but enhanced with guardian magic. Walls that could repel silver-based attacks, windows that filtered harmful energies, and treatment rooms where the very air seemed to accelerate healing processes. Every instrument had been blessed with protective enchantments, making the clinic a true sanctuary within the sanctuary. "How do you feel today?" Blake asked, entering the clinic where Victoria was treating a young wolf who had arrived the previous night with infected silver wounds. Victoria raised her gaze from her patient, her golden eyes reflecting a depth she hadn't possessed when she was completely human. "Different every day," she responded honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of seeing the world with human eyes, but then I look at our protected ones, see how they thrive in safety, and I know I made the right choice." Her connection with Blake had evolved alongside her transformation. Now they could communicate not only through thoughts and emotions, but shared an expanded consciousness that encompassed the entire territory they protected. Every shapeshifter under their care was like an extension of their own family, every potential threat detected before it could materialize. Through the clinic window, they could see the sanctuary's daily activities. Young shapeshifters training under Blake's supervision, learning not only to control their transformations but also to use their abilities to protect and nurture rather than simply hunt. There were families who had arrived from distant communities, seeking a place where their children could grow without fear of persecution. The sanctuary had grown organically, with new arrivals bringing skills and knowledge that enriched the entire community. Former soldiers taught combat techniques, craftsmen built homes and workshops, teachers established schools where both human and shapeshifter history were taught side by side. It was becoming a true society, a model for coexistence that could be replicated elsewhere. Luna, completely recovered from the poisoning, thanks to Victoria's intervention, had assumed the role of the sanctuary's spiritual counselor. Her ancestral knowledge perfectly complemented Victoria's modern powers, creating a healing system that was both effective and deeply comforting for those who had suffered trauma. "The news from other places is encouraging," Luna informed, entering the clinic with a bundle of freshly collected medicinal herbs. Shapeshifter communities throughout the continent are reporting that the Iron Cross Order remnants are dispersing. Without Klaus to coordinate their activities, many of his followers are abandoning the cause. The herbs she carried weren't ordinary plants. They had been cultivated in soil blessed by guardian magic, making them exponentially more potent than their wild counterparts. Luna had developed an entire pharmacology based on magically enhanced botanicals, creating remedies that could treat both mundane ailments and supernatural afflictions. But not everyone had found peace. Klaus had escaped from the final battle, disappearing into the mountains with his wounds and hatred intact. Victoria could sense him occasionally at the limits of her supernatural perception, a somber presence moving from community to community, trying to rebuild his hunter network and plan a new offensive. His movements suggested a man driven by obsession rather than strategy. Where once he had operated with military precision, now his actions carried the desperate edge of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left but his crusade. This made him potentially more dangerous, as desperate enemies were often the most unpredictable. "He'll return," Blake said, reading Victoria's thoughts through their bond. "Men like Klaus don't accept defeat easily. His hatred toward himself and our species is too deep to heal." "I know," Victoria responded, finishing bandaging her young patient's wound. "But when he returns, he'll find something very different from what he expects. We're no longer frightened refugees hiding in the darkness. Now we have a home, a community, and the strength to defend it. The sanctuary had attracted not only local shapeshifters, but also visitors from places as distant as Alaska and Chile. Rumors spread that the last guardian had awakened, that there existed a place where ancient prophecies were being fulfilled, and where peaceful coexistence between humans and shapeshifters wasn't just a dream, but a reality. These visitors brought news of other awakening communities, of humans beginning to question the Order's propaganda, and of shapeshifters finding the courage to live more openly. The sanctuary had become a beacon of hope that was inspiring change far beyond its physical boundaries. One afternoon, while Victoria worked in her medicinal herb garden, she sensed a new presence approaching the sanctuary. It wasn't hostile, but neither was it completely familiar. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, who walked the mountain path with the unconscious grace of someone who possessed supernatural abilities, but didn't yet fully understand them. The woman's aura carried the distinctive signature of emerging guardian abilities, untrained but powerful, like a volcano preparing to erupt. Victoria had been sensing similar awakenings across the continent, part of the worldwide phenomenon the prophecy had foretold. "Dr. Stone?" the visitor asked when she finally reached the garden. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I've traveled from Canada looking for you. I have dreams, visions of wolves and blood moons, and a voice telling me I must find you." Victoria smiled, immediately recognizing what she was seeing. Through her expanded connection with the worldwide supernatural network, she had been sensing similar awakenings in various countries. Young women beginning to manifest the first signs of guardian heritage, called by dreams and visions to seek training and understanding. "Welcome, Carmen," she said, offering her hand to the visitor. "You've come to the right place. There's much you need to learn about what you are and what you can become." Carmen's arrival represented more than just another refugee seeking shelter. She was proof that the guardian bloodline was awakening worldwide, that Victoria's sacrifice had triggered a renaissance that would reshape the balance between species across the globe. That night, as Victoria and Blake prepared for sleep in their personal cabin at the sanctuary's heart, they contemplated the future stretching before them. Their bedroom window offered a perfect view of the valley they had converted into a home for dozens of shapeshifter families, softly illuminated by torchlight and communal fires, where ancestral stories were told to children. The sound of their community settling into peaceful sleep was like a lullaby. Conversations growing quiet, children being tucked into bed, guards taking their positions not out of fear, but as a natural part of protecting something precious. It was the sound of a society that had found its rhythm, its purpose, its hope. "Do you ever imagine how your life would have been if you had never saved that wounded wolf that night?" Blake asked, embracing her from behind as they contemplated their territory. Victoria leaned against him, feeling the warmth and security his presence always provided, even after all the changes they had experienced. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I probably would have continued being a rural veterinarian, treating domestic animals, living a quiet and completely ordinary life, but then I see all this." She gestured toward the valley full of life, "and I know every sacrifice has been worth it." In the eastern horizon, a new moon began rising. It wasn't red like the blood moon that had marked the beginning of her transformation, but silver and serene, illuminating the world with light that promised continuity and growth. "Look," Blake whispered, pointing toward the sky. Victoria followed his gaze and smiled upon seeing what had caught his attention. On the new moon's edge, barely visible but unmistakably present, there was a reddish tint suggesting another blood moon was approaching in the near future. "Others are awakening," she murmured, sensing through her supernatural network the first sparks of consciousness from potential guardians in places as distant as Europe and Asia. The prophecy wasn't referring only to me. It was the beginning of a renaissance for our species. Blake embraced her tighter, sharing his excitement and hope through their unbreakable bond. "Then our work here is just the beginning," he said. "This sanctuary will be the model for others, the place where future guardians will come to learn and find their strength." Victoria nodded, feeling how her purpose expanded beyond protecting a single community toward something truly global. "Klaus may return with new allies and more powerful weapons," she reflected. "But when he does, he won't face just us. He'll face a worldwide network of guardians and shapeshifters united by something stronger than fear or hatred. As the new moon continued its ascension, bathing the mountains in silver light, Victoria and Blake remained at their window, contemplating a future they had helped forge with sacrifice and love. The sanctuary slept peacefully at their feet, but both knew it was only the beginning of a new era where humans and shapeshifters could coexist not as enemies, but as shared guardians of a world that needed both species to prosper. The war had ended, but building true peace was just beginning. And in the Wyoming mountains, under the light of a new moon that promised infinite possibilities, two souls linked by destiny and choice, prepared to guide their people toward a dawn that would last forever. The echo of wolves howling in harmony rose from the valley, a chorus of voices celebrating not just survival, but the transformation of a species that had learned that true love could overcome even the deepest hatred. Victoria Stone's story had begun with a veterinarian saving a wounded wolf on a stormy night. Now it had become the legend of a guardian who had sacrificed her humanity to protect a world where hope could flourish, even in the darkest places. And somewhere, under other moons on other continents, new guardians were beginning to awaken, called by dreams of wolves and destinies they didn't yet fully understand, but which would soon lead them toward similar sanctuaries where love could conquer fear and peace could be more than a distant dream.